Thank you all so much for coming. So nice to see so many students across classes and some people that I don't know yet. So thank you guys. I really appreciate Karen in the back. Thank you for all you do. So I'm going to be introducing our 2022 visiting writer. But first I wanted to tell you a little bit about Poem in Your Pocket Day. Poem in Your Pocket Day is this year on April 29th. It was first conceived in April 2002 by the Office of the Mayor in New York City in partnership with the city's Departments of Cultural Affairs and Education. And then it was extended nationally by the Academy of American Poets in 2008 to encourage the reading of poetry by carrying around a poem in your pocket in the month of April, which is National Poetry Month. So I have made shrunken down little poems for your pockets that I laminated, because laminating is actually quite fun. And they're all by living writers, living poets, including one by Felicia Zamora. So please feel free to take one or even two. I think there's enough for multiples if you want. And some of poet.org's recommendations for what you might do with these poems are sharing the poem on social media using the hashtag pocket poem, recording a video of yourself reciting the poem and then sharing it on social media, adding the poem to your email footer, or simply just reading the poem to your close friends, family, and communities. So if you didn't grab one on your way in, feel free to grab one on your way out. So now I will be introducing Webster University's spring visiting poet, Felicia Zamora. Capacious and nanoscopic. This is how I would describe the work of Felicia Zamora. How at once her poems discuss the macro and micro histories we carry in our bodies. Histories inherited and haunted. Present tense becoming histories. Each history distinct and integral to the next. Each past, a part of us like a breath, part of a system, respiratory, circulatory, familial, racial, threaded systems that together make a life, or as the collective calls for in many of Zamora's poems, makes many lives. Brown lives, Black lives, colonized lives, fatherless lives, lives living on borders, between borders, in motels, in nations their own, nations not their own, all in need of belonging, sanctuary, home, love. Zamora's work is about the ways we carry our lives with us through our bodies. And within that, lineages of pain, witness, language, song, and voice. What a voice Zamora is. In her poem, Beautiful Fault, she says, if we fracture a system long enough, our voices build a neoteric system with our voices inside. Neoteric, meaning new, a needed newness. Zamora's voice is the new voice we need to carry us through these times of unrest, divide, and inhumanity as we struggle through a global pandemic, systemic racism, and a world wrought with war and xenophobia. In a review of I Always Carry My Bones, the reviewer describes the body in Zamora's work as, quote, a living archive and an aftermath. But both of these words denote something defunct or possibly destroyed. In Zamora's work, the body is a perpetual living mechanism, an entity of continuousness. All this a bone map, she describes, in need of a new sky to guide its illumination. In one poem, she writes, even the most minute parts of us mimic creation over and over. In another, she challenges us to look at the way a body renders a universe in its organs. Zamora uses her poetic lens as a microscope or a laparoscope to give us physiological access to the systems and worlds inside us. This is a hopeful action, an action that demands we pay attention, we witness, we continue to live. Capacious and nanoscopic, like the child in her poem, Prayer to Consciousness, the child that, quote, smears her finger in gelatinous yellow, believes she knows how to contort the sun around a pinky the size of the universe. Zamora asks the question, how do we empty anything from memory? Perhaps the answer is, we don't. We instead let memory live inside the body, inside the poem, as capacious and nanoscopic evidence of our lives. How lucky we are to have access to a life like Zamora. Felicia Zamora is the author of 6 books of poetry, all worth naming, of Form and Gather, winner of the 2016 Andreas Montoya Poetry Prize, and in Open Marvel, published by Parlor Press, Instrument of Gaps, published by Slope Editions, Body of Render, winner of the 2018 Benjamin Saltman Award, I Always Carry My Bones, winner of the 2020 Iowa Poetry Prize, and her newest collection, Quotient, just released from Tinderbox Editions this month. She was the 2017 Poet Laureate of Fort Collins, Colorado, and has received many fellowships and residencies in her distinguished career, along with publishing her work in numerous national literary journals. She is currently an assistant professor of poetry at the University of Cincinnati and is the associate poetry editor for the Colorado Review. Everyone, please help me give the warmest welcome to our visiting writer, Felicia Zamora.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, yes, please wave, see some hands. You know, there may be some moments where this is actually interactive. I want to thank Webster University, but very specifically, Dr. Kimmy Gray. Kimmy, my friend, my mentor at times. I love and adore you. Thank you to the faculty here at Webster University. I'm so honored to be here. My first time in St. Louis, and the first time is your campus. Yay! I'm going to be reading some pieces for you all from my book, I Always Carry My Bones, which I believe some of you have actually interacted with, and Kimmy read a little bit from that. And I'm also going to read new pieces because I have this unbelievable infidelity toward my own art that it's always the thing I'm working on. It's the thing that's right in front of me that feels like the achievement where my attention is. Because a secret that they don't tell artists and writers is that it's never the last poem, it's never the last essay, it is never the last short story, and it is never the last book. There's always more. It doesn't run out. It'll be there. So you got to trust that. Who are my writers in the room? Yeah. Okay, who are my fiction writers? Who are my poets? Yeah. Nonfiction. Oh, you know, it's funny. Usually the nonfiction is way more. Thank you, thank you. You know, as writers, we pick genres at times, but we really truly can cross genre. You can write whatever you feel you need to in whatever form needs to come out. And in the poems that I'm going to be talking about and reading to you, these were 40 some years in the making. How many of you have work inside of you that you don't feel you can yet put to the page? That's right. Honor that and know that as an artist, you will discover when the time is right. Some things you're going to know about me through my art, so I'm just going to get it out there. Never met my father. Never met him. He's from Mexico, and I am estranged to my language of Spanish, and I am estranged to my culture in some ways because of that. I grew up in a motel. Not like one of those cool 70s motels that you see in the movies, more like the Bates Motel gone wrong. Okay. Grew up in a motel from low socioeconomic class in this country. You know, that's all very relative to location and relative to the world in which we live in, but poverty. You know, I was seen as a poor brown kid, poor brown Mexican kid, where no one ever said to me, Felicia, be an artist. Let your creativity and your art guide you. And that is something that I am here, and I believe Kimmy is here, and your faculty are here to help rectify. Your art and your creation can guide you, can be a career, can make money, and can make you unbelievably happy. We're creators, we're storytellers. We all have story inside of us. How you decide to have that story come out is completely up to you. But don't let people tell you otherwise. You can be a scientist and a poet all at the same damn time. And what you'll see in some of my poetry is that I am obsessed with the human body. Obsessed is probably saying it lightly. And the reason I am is because when the world baffles me, when I look around and there are Black individuals being murdered in the streets, when there are brown kids being locked up, when there are basically concentration camps going on in this country, when Asian Pacific Islanders are being tortured and violence toward them is unbearable, when we have queer and trans kids who cannot be themselves because of laws being passed in school systems, I do not know what is going on, and I turn to the body to help understand that. That if you were to open us up and slice us down the middle, and I know this is kind of gross, but if you were to look at our anatomy, we are so similar on the cellular level. We have so much connectivity that to learn to love the difference really seems ridiculous. How, for me, can we not do that? So the body for me is a connector. It's a bridge of understanding. Okay. Sometimes I story tell too, so I'll have to keep an eye to not over story tell. So I'm gonna begin. I'm gonna read my favorites from this book. You know, as a writer, you're apparently not supposed to have favorites of what you've written. I think that's BS. I definitely have favorites, and I want to share them with you today. And then I'm gonna read some new pieces, because I want you to get a feel for where I'm at now versus when this book was written, which, gosh, this book was written 2018, 2019, then accepted for publication in 2020 and came out in 2021. So, you know, the life of a book has this kind of longer trajectory than what we think about. And so some of these poems, even though I read them and I know that I created them, I step away and I'm like, wow, sometimes I don't even remember having written all of this. And that's the beauty of the artistic process, right? It's that intention that we have with the ineffable process of creation that we don't fully understand. That is a beautiful thing. So I'm going to start with a poem called Dear Coyote. And the word coyote in Latinx culture and also indigenous culture has some pretty complicated meanings. Of the word coyote can be both positive, negative, it could be heart-wrenching, it could be lovely, it could be stinging. This particular series, though, that says Dear Coyote, has a story attached to it. When I said I hadn't written about my father in 40 some years, it's because I didn't know how, because it was a wound that I was still gushing from. And we don't want to rewound ourselves in our creations. It happens sometimes, but we have to be ready. We have to be ready for what's going to be there when we do bring it to the page and when it lives beyond us. And so I was living in Phoenix, and I lived by a place called South Mountain. And I was out hiking by myself. A lot of stories, sorry. I was out hiking by myself, and often in the distance, I saw a coyote kind of lumbering around. And I got really scared because there was no one else on the trail. And I turned around and went back to my car and went home. And when I got home, I was so disappointed with myself of how could I be so afraid of a coyote off in the distance, right? So the next morning I get up at the same time, about 6 a.m., go to South Mountain and start hiking again. Well, that coyote, and I say that coyote because I know it was the same, lumbered not even 5 feet in front of me, right on the trail, looked at me, maybe gave me a nod. I'm not sure. I might throw that. That might not be true, but did look at me and kept going. I went home and began this poem, which was the first poem I've ever written about my father. It was time, and that was a sign. Dear Coyote, I stitched the stars and patterns of your chin, your kneecap, your rib, your gait, a constellation of absence. I map your body, a celestial cartography, to understand my own echo, my own cave in the torso, cave of undoing. When you beat my brother's face with a sack of potatoes, when he bruised and you drew the burlap back for blood, did you smell lilac? Believe your fists made us into something beautiful. When you opened our mother with knuckles scented from other vaginas, did you believe in your gift past? I cut my breasts in the mirror and consider the tissues of violence. If I crack my neck and cleave at the thyroid and pull out the medulla oblongata, will I cross-section the parts of you that continue to wound? I am a poor butcher and an even poorer butcher's daughter. My fingers fail to sew you into being, for each star a sun in bleed of light, destructive and vitalizing. We both know this thread and needle ignite in each baste, each backstitch of form. We both hold the weight of ash in our lungs. Kimmy mentioned it at the beginning. Dr. Kimmy Gray. I like saying Dr. Kimmy Gray, sorry. I knew Dr. Gray as a student at the University of Cincinnati, and I'm just so honored that she is Dr. Kimmy Gray now, and I like to say it out loud as many times as possible. So Dr. Gray had mentioned that motel in the introduction, and it is, you know, that strange fact about me of growing up in a space where my grandparents were white, my mom is white, and when she left my father and drove up from Mexico for safety reasons and left everything she ever owned and moved in with my grandparents, they owned this motel. They had recently bought it as a retirement investment. But they were also extremely racist. And my brother and sister and my mom and I were forced to live in the diner section, the old diner section of the motel. There was actually bedrooms attached to the motel, but we weren't allowed in it because we were dirty and we were Mexican and we were gross. And coming to terms with what that means as a child versus what that means as an adult is kind of a hard reckoning. So this poem encapsulates some of that. It's called Motel. We don't talk about the fleas, the cat named Baby on a leash inside, the mice or babies longing for mice, the switch to light the motel sign that we couldn't touch, the washer we couldn't touch, the lawnmower we couldn't touch. You're not smart enough to work this. The TV remote we couldn't touch. 1966 Dodge Charger in metallic cobalt on blocks inside the carport with the collapsed roof we couldn't touch. The empty room up the stairs, first on the left, our uncle's 70s weights and collared shirts we couldn't touch. Grandma's fake pearls, color of her skin, her Sunday pearls she kept on the nightstand we couldn't touch. The old shower Jimmy rigged to work as a sink, and how we used a hose to wash a plate. The crack of office window where my head shattered, the sound of glass falling in the ears, years to fix, the lack of fix, in any vocabulary. The toilet revving like a rocket ship in the bathroom of seafoam green, tile and mildew and razor blade between forefinger and thumb for one more go home wetback. The orange shag carpet that made our bare feet squirm, the living room below the stairs we couldn't enter, the story of a pool table we couldn't touch, a thing of power, the diner closed and made into a living room and bedroom and kitchen and bathroom for 4, specifically 3 brown kids who won't amount to anything. The smell of must and lye of his unwashed body, his leg whittled to bone from atrophy. What sharing a bed with my mother until I was 11 means to me now. How empty space belonged to junk rather than 3 growing kids. How we all grow out of something. How difficult it is for me to say us, me, we, and really mean Mel, Felicia, Joe. The never birthday parties, thinking I had done something wrong to never warrant celebration. Smell of pilot light in winter jaw chatter. Smell of her hair when we kissed her goodnight with the sun pedestaled above the tree line. Her knuckles cracked and bloody, and how we knew what salve did, but not why she wouldn't. The gravel parking lot and how it expanded out into a sea of town and sneers and corn and steeples and whispers and fists and faith and grit and stone of when a heart must, a human heart must. The hinges on a screen door, slightly rusted as a mantra, closing at my back from a distance too far to measure, too heavy to look back. Oh, it's so quiet. And, yeah, you can see, but I do want you to know that most of these pieces, I'm not rewounded by them anymore. It is, and that we were talking about this at lunch. There's a possibility of rewounding, but it is also a therapeutic thing. It is not in replace of therapy and counseling and mental health care, but it is a way that creation can help us heal by not bearing that weight, just what is inside of us, to let it out many times. Oh, I think this one title is pretty explanatory. But I do want to say that imagination helps to fill in gaps at times. How many of you have perhaps a history that you don't remember everything about it? It's fuzzy, it's gapped, it's gone. That's a survival technique that the body does. Sometimes we don't remember so we can keep living. Sometimes we don't remember so we can survive to the next day. Don't let memory or the lack of memory be something that you're shamed to believe is something that's bad with the body. It's actually a good thing. It can be a good thing. And at times as writers, we step into imagination to allow us to have conversations of what may have been, what was, or our own futurity to see what that might look like. Upon never meeting my father holds quartz in his hand. Whittle it sharp enough, you could cut your Achilles. He snickers and I watch with wet eyes, closed. Humid musk permeates the horizontal of my body, laying among dewy corn, knees and wrists and thighs still and silent as the dead, he says, flip open their eyelids in their coffins to chuck damnation back at the living. He flicks his fingers into my face quicker, as if casting a spell. I do not move, do not flinch. He does not know which of us is the dead in this equation. I have no heart to tell him. He combs my hair with thumbs. He combs my hair with scents of 100 box elder bugs just before dawn. He combs my hair with pliers, pulls out mats of hair, follicles like onion bulbs, says, your grandmother Petra lost 2 front teeth at 37. Turns from me, and I know his back means we are a lineage in pieces. I run my tongue over grooves of a smile, hidden between closed lips. Below the lip of the forest, he holds my hand, lifts me over the bramble, lets the thorns slice and tear at my ankles and shins. Blood binds you, he snorts, echoes with the sheep grunts and exhaust pipes from the old highway, and he licks his knuckles as if the earth sticks like sinew between his incisors. And I pray to the June bugs in July, he doesn't know what he's saying, doesn't understand geometry and magic and a spinal cord and quaver of a cell it knows, a cell in tonal scrape, and doesn't know how limbs of a mulberry tree were never meant to hug his daughter's flesh to sleep, how milk and blood sour in all this heat. Thank you. I know some of these are, yeah. Kimmy had mentioned joy and reclamation, and I do see these poems working toward that. That yes, there is pain and a searching, but there is also a defiance to them. And this, I think the second poem of the book, Bodies in Water, I think also demonstrates that. My brother and I were kicked out of swimming lessons for being brown. So I don't know how to swim very well. I can swim, not well. Like if you drop me in the deep end of the ocean, I don't know, probably not. And actually my partner doesn't swim well either. And we have that in common. But this sort of thinks about that at the time, I was a child and was kicked out and couldn't go back to the swimming pool in the small town that we lived in. And I just thought, well, those are rules, right? And then I realized that those rules don't apply to everybody. Bodies and water. I think about my kneecaps, my ear canal, the slight webbing between toes and fingers. I think about brown bodies, my body, how my belly ebbs and sinks and floats and calms in water. I think about Black bodies, about statistics, how 65% of Black American children cannot swim, 60% for Latinx children, 79% from low-income families. How statistics hold history in the sharp end of attack. My brother and me thrown out of swim lessons for causing trouble, limbs reach and tread, lacking know-how. How a statistic takes any receptacle, how a statistic takes a term like access and wads it into a crumpled shape in search of any receptacle other than a docket. Our cells contain wet and wombing history of sea and salt in our nervous systems. Our cells crave water, and in turn, crave equity. No magic equation exists to explain why what's made of water wants water. No need. The human body consists of organs and tissues and hydrogen and calcium and sodium and chlorine and water and water and water and water. Why must my water offend your water? Fuck your count of my offensive features. Labia, mustache, mammary glands, black hair on my nipples, thoughts in my cranium, uterus, hope sown in cerebrum, words readied at tongue. You dominant narrative, a scratched record caught in dilapidated loop, white noise that coats ammonia down my throat to attempt erasure, history of attempts. You cannot remove water from water, sea from sea. Okay, and I think I have, how am I doing on time, Kimmy? Okay, I think I'm gonna read a couple new pieces and see what you think about them. I have been really obsessed with the form. How many of you have written or know about the form the Zui Hitsu? Oh, look it up. Talk to Kimmy. The Zooey-Hitsu is one of my favorite forms. It's both can be used in prose and poetry. But what it is it's very, it uses association and juxtapositioning within either prose blocks, or you can also do them in stanzas, where there is not necessarily a thread that you can fully identify, but there are echoes of a theme that kind of keeps going throughout the piece. And for me, and I think one author has actually called it like the Zooey-Hitsu form is like clouds moving in the wind. So if you think about how the thought patterns and the expression of your art works, the Zooey-Hitsu is one if you're really thinking about using that juxtapositioning to ask a reader to think of why these moments sit next to each other. Why are they there? So this one is called Meditations on Flesh. An ulcer develops inside my lower lip in crevice of gum line. The translucent milky gray pox oral mucosa landscape of dark pink. And I remember my flesh incubates, a home for short-lived tenants, evolving a kind of thought come to life in the mouth, carrying the acts of membranes and cells. What haunts the body sometimes haunts from interior vantage. The ground squirrel in California chews on rattlesnake skin, spits out the paste to apply to its own body. A confused rattlesnake smells its own deadly and hesitates at the familiar venom. I look in the mirror and I think of all my jaws chew and spit out. I both predator and prey. How language thistles on my tongue and stick to flesh laid bare. Pulmonary artery and expose from lick. Environment changes us. In the Alden Motel, stray cats brought fleas. My ankles swollen and torn from indentations of my own nails. Dust mites caused allergic fits. Stuffy nose, runny eyes, lack of smell for weeks on end. Nudibranches change skin coloration by changing diet. Octopi camouflage their bodies when threatened. Octopi swim fast in open ocean. Butterfly wings contain eye spots, circular patterns to resemble the eyes of larger animals, to confuse and misdirect with disruptive coloration. The monarch butterfly uses aposematism to ward off prey. Sometimes we hide, sometimes illuminate to keep ourselves alive. The polar bear's physicality acts as prism. Black skin under translucent fur reflects the sun to only appear white. In art, black contains the presence of all colors. In physics and spectrum, the opposite. To understand the human condition, we must acknowledge that both theories exist simultaneously and in tandem. When my mother warned, if you touch the monarch butterfly's wings, she can never return home, she dies. My finger's already on the wing. Too late to release, too early to understand the lie. My left knee contains asphalt from a childhood bike accident. 3 kids on one dirt bike and a serious hill. My brother held my chin in his palm to the top of the hill. Don't look down. Only when I saw the blood, I cried. Only when I saw and felt the rip and sear of missing skin. Blue-green scar, plumps and circles, itches when cold, itches long before the rest of my leg. Biochromes absorb and reflect certain wavelengths of light. Octopi harbor these microscopic pigments to change color and patterns and even opacity. To be able to see inside, become more sheer. If our skin melts transparent, If our inner workings expose, blink and glow like moon jellyfish in deep ocean, would we feel each other, feel our connectivity, or sour that too? National Geographic tells me a rhyme for how to remember what snake patterns to be cautious of. Red on yellow kills a fellow. Red on black won't hurt Jack. The lines catch and repeat in my mind. In summer 2020, a Starbucks barista asked the white woman to wear a required mask. She attacked him. His friends raised $100,000 in GoFundMe. The woman sued for half. Red on yellow. In seeing maggots on a deer carcass, my skin crawls as I watch their bodies writhe in and around each other, squirm in compost. Fly larvae, to be exact. Wikipedia says the word maggot doesn't exist as a technical term or an entomology. Perhaps my reaction stems from misunderstanding. Perhaps the heap of bodies clangs a bell, reminds me of love, a closeness gone missing. And I think, if it's okay, I have one more. I will end with this one, which is a piece that I wrote it really fast. It got revised really fast, and it felt like a really meaningful piece to me. And it's about representation and how, as individuals of color, as trans and queer individuals, as people with disabilities, the representation that we see in the media and politics, we're not there. We're not there. It's changing, but it's changing very slowly. And so this has to do, this is a poem for my mom, for women, and for the vice president. Chris Martin sings Shiver, and I shiver, a poem for Madam Vice President. This poem isn't for Coldplay or rock and roll or the Honda speakers or the 275 on-ramp to Dayton, Ohio on November 11th. This poem isn't for Martin, isn't for the way his stool shook at First Avenue Club, where I touched his foot, sweaty palmed and sweaty breasted, before Apple, before Madison Square, and mouthed, "This Coldplay's gonna be big." This poem isn't for my grandfather or his "you'll never amount to anything" gutturals, his "you dirty spick, waste of sperm," pupils and spit at my brown body, my brown irises. This poem isn't for the associate vice provost who pulled me into his office after the 2016 election saying, "We liberals will always be at a disadvantage, Felicia, because we're unwilling to do horrible things to win." After asking me about my undocumented family, after asking, "You're Mexican, right?" This poem is not for his damaging white liberalism. This poem isn't for the playground, splashed with my blood after being punched in the face by the kid a grade above me and fucking taco in his saliva. Isn't for the asphalt, the Snickers, or that kid, all those kids. This poem is for Kamala Harris, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris. This poem is for my little brown body between my grandfather and the television, alert and still, not running away, a demand to be seen. This poem is for my moon boots, thrift store gems, and the tip of the right boot in that kid's groin. This poem is for my mother, who wrote 9 children's books in the 80s and not one accepted for publication. This poem is for the bear that changes colors, glasses for Tommy Tiger, Betty Butterfly's strange mirror, and the author's signature, Linda Zamora. For the reason I became a poet, to write a poem to Madam Vice President, to say the word possibility and believe it. This poem is for the trillions of false litanies to women. You can't X, can't Y, don't Z, cunt. You should Y, you should X. Fuck off. You don't belong. Don't get your panties in a bunch. Let me mansplain X. Relax. It's just a joke. You wanted this. May this match burn all these down. This poem is for women. This poem is for trans women. This poem is for queer women. This poem is for Black women. This poem is for brown women. This poem is for Truth and Tubman and Parks. This poem is for Dove and Hooks and Sanchez. This poem is for Anzaldúa, Baez, Cisneros. This poem is for women. This poem is for Madam Vice President Kamala Harris. This poem is for how Martin sings Shiver, and I shiver at your smile the night the electoral votes hit 290 blue. I see my face in your smile, all the faces of history. I shiver for history. I shiver for my smile inside your smile. I shiver for the necessity of shivering long overdue, shivers of shivers. This poem is a guzzle. This poem is a guzzle because it's a worldview. We stitch the stars down to earth now. We stitch the stars deep inside the soil of us, cells, saltwater guts. We stitch with hair and wishbones for eyes, stitch until fingers bleed, and then we stitch on top of the stitches. We taught ourselves to sew. We taught ourselves out of invisibility, the difference between the shadow cast and the body, and yet part of the body, and how a shadow means a body exists, a body in light. Step in, dear sisters. Step in. Thank you. Yeah, and we left a couple minutes if people have questions. Are there any questions? Yeah. And can you say the first part of it?
In your career, have you ever received negative comments or critiques on your work?
Oh, yeah, great question. Absolutely. Here's a statistic that will make you all feel better about yourselves right now. I have been rejected for publication over 3,000 times. I have a database that I keep track of them. 3,000 times. So if you've ever submitted something for publication and you that one piece didn't get accepted, wait another 2,999 times and see how you feel. But I bring that up because out of the 3,000 times I've been rejected, I've had 6 books published. I've had many poems anthologized. I've had essays published. That it's part of our industry in creative writing to figure out a way of how we react to rejection, but then also like negativity. So for example, one of my books has a 1 on Goodreads and the person put, it's just too hard. And I think another one maybe got a 1, another book, and they said, I just don't like it. And you know, you have to give up to that people are gonna have opinions and they're gonna have opinions about your art too. But why are you doing it? Why do you create? That's really the key, is that we have to figure out how to have the understanding that one person's comment or one person's ideation of our creation isn't what matters. What matters is ours. What do you think about your own work? Because I write because I can't stop. I don't write thinking who is my audience going to be or who's going to publish this and who's going to think that this is a really great book. No, first I create, I put it together, and then I'm like, okay, maybe I'll have a fleeting thought of some of those things, but it's not the driver. First create. It's a great question. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. Hello? Okay. Do you have any sort of writing process? Like whenever it comes to specific books or even just a specific poem, is it different for every single poem? Is there any sort of process?
Yeah, that's also a great question. How many of you carve time out to write? Good. How many of you are like, well, I do it when the assignment makes me? Sometimes. Hey, both, right? Like if I have a deadline, I got to create something, right? But the way that my writing process is that I try to take advantage of when I am sparked with inspiration, even if it's writing down a few words, even if it's just writing down a few images or a couple thoughts, I put it down somewhere, either in a journal. I have both a physical journal and an electronic journal. And I also record my voice because sometimes I'll just be out doing something very random. And then I'll stop as I'm walking into the grocery store and record a few lines for a potential research later, or poem lines, or just images. And I think giving into that, because especially for you poets out there, I didn't want to just write poetry. I wanted a poetic existence where poetry helped define and shape who I wanted to be in the life I wanted to have. And what that meant is I had to be able to integrate it into all the things that I was doing. It wasn't separate from my life. It was my life. And that means carving out time. That means if something inspires you, if you have a minute between a class or a minute between work, that you take that minute and you write something down, that it is in all that you do. And for me, I have found that so much more fulfilling because I'm not worried about, oh, did I make time to write today? I'm not like that. I don't write every day. I do write in bursts, and I also get pretty obsessive when I'm on a project, which means time will be made. And I've also chosen a career that I love working with artists. You know, I believe Kimmy does too. We choose a career because we love working with you. We also choose a career that helps our creativity flourish. I am an artist, an educator, and a thinker, and I will never give up any of those three pieces of me. And we shouldn't have to, right? I hope that answers your question. Oh, another strange thing about my writing process though, and I got interviewed by the Poetry Center in Tucson about this, and I didn't realize it was a big thing, but I don't save drafts. As I write something, if I don't think it belongs there, I will erase and take it out and never think about it again. Because I don't want to hold on to something that feels disingenuous to the art. So I literally wrote a sonnet a couple months ago. The next day, erased the whole thing and started from scratch. Because I didn't want I didn't want the pieces that I knew weren't supposed to be there to impact what was going to happen with it. The other drafts were so much better. and being able to do that, being able to know that there's going to be more, you know, that's not the last thing I'll ever write. Not that you shouldn't save your drafts, you do whatever you're comfortable with, but that's just something that I learned to do because that's just how I create, I think. Any other questions?
Oh, that's loud. Do you ever get frustrated with working and with your art, and how do you get over that if you do? Like writer's block.
Well, I think there's two big things when you're talking about frustration in our art. One of them is writer's block, and the other one is feeling like an imposter. And both of those things, I think I ask you to take them and throw them on the ground, step on them, and tell them to shut the fuck up. Because we are not imposters. When we do the work and we create, it's imposter to what and to whom. We need to stop comparing ourselves to other artists out there. You are you, your thinking, your creativity, time and space, and all of those motions mean that whatever you make will be original and it will be from you. And so with the imposter syndrome, that's something we all have to get over. And I say, to do that, but I still have moments and I fight it because I want to be someone who celebrates all artistry. If I know someone who's winning awards out there, any good news about poetry is good news for me too, because it means poetry is getting recognized. And then when it comes to writer's block, I believe it's one of those made up concepts like gender or time and time, where these are superimposed on us, right? Like, I don't actually believe time is linear. I think it's more like an organic amoeba that does this. Like, our ancestors are here with us simultaneously, especially from migrant cultures. Like, what intergenerational trauma is real. It's not in the past. It's carried with us, right? I always carry my bones, kind of thing. And so with writer's block, I don't believe it's real. I think we use it as an excuse because we aren't writing. But I think if we give ourselves grace to say, you know what, I'm not writing, and that's cool. That's okay. We are going to get to the page and create more often when we are generous to ourselves. And just know that, yeah, you're making a decision to not write or create. And sometimes that decision is really important to say no. I mean, after George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor was murdered, and the pandemic was raging, I couldn't write. I couldn't. And I leaned into that, and I gave myself a lot of grace and said, that's okay. You don't know why, and you don't have to.
In I Always Carry My Bones, the idea of weight is just like extremely consistent. It tracks through the whole book. And I guess I just wanted to ask if you feel lighter for having written it.
Oh, it's a beautiful question. I do. I feel lighter in the sense of carrying burdens around with us, which isn't a burden either. Like, also seeing that it's not a burden, that our complex histories, each one of you has a complex lineage of where you come from, the things that you're dealing with, your mental state, the day-to-day workings. That's all really complex, and it can become overwhelming. And if we can create, if we can be honest with ourselves about what we need to talk about and who we need to talk about it with, it can make us feel lighter. Because there is a heaviness when we don't have community, when we feel isolated, when we are cut off from people who care about us. We are a communal species, yo. I know as writers and artists, we want to be like, I do this all on my own. We don't. We do not do this on our own. We have to have community. And if you're someone who has always been a loner, I fully respect that. I was too, and I was miserable. I was miserable. I thought that my suffering was something that I had to carry alone. And I realized opening up, many people are suffering. And when we come together, we don't suffer as much. We just really, really don't. And so for me, this wasn't because I shared these poems with my sister and brother. Some of them, when they were published on really wide venues of like Boston Review, I got really nervous, and I called my sister and brother and I just said, hey, your friends who may not know our history are going to hear some things about our family. Are you okay with that? And they were both extremely supportive of me. Like, yes, of course. I got a little terrified because this book sits so close to me as human being Felicia. Where authorial presence, we don't always assume that the voice in poetry is the author. The I could be a character, or it can be an embodiment of a situation of a character. But we can't just dispose of authorial presence, though, especially when it comes to identity, because we want to honor the identities of the individuals who are also embarking on this art. So I think for me, yeah, weight is a big thing, because we can be very heavy. And I felt like as a child, I was way heavier than what I should have. Some of you maybe feel this too, like you were basically 10 going on 50. And you probably still have it now. don't always have to carry that. You can decide to alleviate it. Sometimes it's through the arts, sometimes it's through therapy, sometimes it's through counseling, sometimes it's through deciding what to hold on to and what to let go of. And those are all really important things that you all have to decide in your existence, if and when you want to come to terms with any of those. Good question. Thank you.
One more round of applause for Felicia. Very generously said she would be happy to sign your book, so I don't know if there's a.
There's a room out there you can sit
Oh.
at a desk.
So outside. of the
Yeah,
library?
let's go ahead.
Okay.
I'll show you.
So if you do want your book signed, please, meet us out in the lobby, and if not, thank you guys so much for coming, and have a wonderful day. Yeah.